Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Business Podcast. Today, I'm here with Simon Hareb. And today, what I want us to explore is what does it take to grow a business intentionally and scale it without sacrificing the things that matter. Because while we try and grow a business, there's a lot of sacrifices and a lot of prices we have to pay. Some might be justified, some might be worth. So today, I want to explore that. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I first met you a few months ago, and we started talking about what you're doing with the Intentional Leaders Network. And I thought that was really, really fascinating in terms of the way you think about business growth. And I thought, now we have to have these conversations and expound it. The place I wanted us to start is a little bit about your journey.
Yeah.
How you got into business, and the epiphanies that brought you to the point in time whereby you decided that, okay, there's got to be a different way of growing business than the conventional, yeah?
So I didn't start off in business at all.
Oh, wonderful.
I actually started off in the film industry, and I did that for about 7 years. So being based in Cape Town, you have beautiful scenery, really good light, and it's pretty cost effective. So I was doing a lot of commercials, mostly based out of Europe. So did a lot with the UK, France, Germany. And that was a really great experience for a lot of reasons. One of the things, so over that 7-year period, I probably did 300 odd commercials, and I did about 5 to 7 full-length feature films. It's all a bit blurry, but sort of I did 5 full length and then aspects of two smaller productions.
Was it like a South African company working with the US, working with the UK? Did you have like a subsidiary? Was it like a company with a subsidiary in both countries, or was it complete outsourcing?
Yeah. So what it was Cape Town-based production houses who would then service international projects. I did a few local commercials as well, just to keep myself busy from time to time. The bulk of the work was international because the pay was better, and also just getting to work with that caliber of client and that caliber of a lot of the critical crew members would fly in from overseas. So generally the director, the producer, the DOP, director of photography, they would all fly in for the project, and then the local crew would assist them. Over that period, it was really interesting because each commercial that you do or each project that you do is almost like joining a new business each time. So you really get to see quite quickly what tends to work, what doesn't work, what influences the success of a project. And that was probably the first time I really started to look at 2 things. The one was systems and how important they are to success of a project. So teams who had clear systems for as basic as how you unpack your lighting truck to, how you track the f-stop on the camera, and back then we were shooting in film. Okay. So you needed to know what film stock you had in, if you had filters, what they would do to, your stop, etc. Where teams had these systems in place, they would always be more efficient and more effective than when they didn't. And you could see the difference in caliber between someone who was professional and someone who was just sort of making it up as they go along. Mm-hmm. So I guess for me, that was a big highlight in terms of the intention that we're talking about, in terms of being quite intentional with how you do things. And the second thing that it highlighted was the importance of good leadership. If I looked at a call sheet, I could see based on who the HODs were, whether or not that project was going to be painful or that project was going to be a fun one to work on. And so I guess it was quite fortunate to have that period of 7 years where I was just working on so many different projects, very often fairly high stress, sometimes fairly dangerous work we were doing. Loads of fun, got to travel a lot, got to meet some amazing people. For various reasons, I moved out of the industry. Mostly it was based on lifestyle. Okay. So it was great as a young man to have those experiences and live that life. As I started to get more serious about relationships and what I wanted to do with my life, living out of a hotel room and working these crazy hours and really just being as good as your next job, so constantly having to hustle to get to the next job. I just wanted something that was a little bit more secure and consistent.
How did you make that transition to working in a highly creative industry to now going and starting your own business?
Oh, there was so much overlap.
Yeah.
So the film industry by its nature requires creativity, but it's also very structured. You really do have to have a very clear outline and a very clear goal for what you're trying to achieve, or you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money not getting anything that's actually usable. You're also working on the fly a lot. You're having to make things up. Well, not make things up as you go, but you're certainly having to solve problems as they arise, unexpected very often, working around things like, the weather, working around talent, working around even, critical staff potentially not being there, and you've got 100 people sitting around costing millions of rands or dollars an hour, and you're not able to film because someone's sick in the bathroom. So there are multiple lessons that were transferable. The way that my transition worked was I was doing quite a lot in the film industry in terms of product placement. So I was working with some of the brands who I'd made friends with who were working in advertising to get product placement within movies. And through that, I had some friends who were climbers who had a business that they were wanting to launch a little more seriously. And they were just looking for someone to advise them on the marketing strategy and some sales strategy. So I met with them and agreed to sort of spend some time with them and see how that went. Nothing formalized. And within a fairly short period of time, I realized that they were onto something that was quite unique and that had a lot of potential to actually become a serious business in the industry. And it just worked really well that I was at a time where I was evaluating my life, and I realized that I actually wanted to make these changes and maybe transition out of the film industry. This opportunity came about, and they were very strong when it came to the technical side of the business. When it came to presenting to clients and so on, they needed some assistance, so I slotted in quite nicely there. When I joined them, they were literally, I think I was employee number 5 or 6. So and that was, office staff, and they really were working on 1 or 2 big projects a year, mostly around installing decorations in shopping centers for Christmas and so on. And they knew that there was the application to take the methodology for reaching work at height areas that they were using and use that for a whole bunch of other areas of industry, maintenance. And so, joined them, and just under 20 years later,
wow, that was a big tenure.
So it was. But as I said, I was so lucky to join so early on, and to be able to experience the growth and grow with the business over a period of time. It did come with challenges, particularly around the growth stage, not being able to let go of certain things. And that was an ego thing. Like, if I'm being honest, that was me feeling like no one else could do it as well as I could. So instead of starting to delegate, what I ended up doing was just working longer hours, working later. And that sort of culminated in me just taking stock of where I was. And that was the beginning of the workings of where we are with the Intentional Leaders Network, in terms of me realizing I needed to be a lot more intentional about how I spent my time and how I managed things. So that journey within the business started within sales and marketing, then became very operational because we needed to deliver on what I had sold. And then from there transitioned into, we actually had a spin-off company that worked specifically in oil and gas throughout Africa. And one of my partners went on to, so that was then sold off to a Norwegian company, and he remained on as our sort of group CEO, but I took over as managing director, which I did for about 13 years or so. Obviously also became a partner in the business quite early on as well. So that was my journey to transition out of film and into something quite different.
There's a lot there to unpack. I want to talk about those early days of rebuilding the company. So at this stage, you meet a bunch of people who are very good technically, but obviously you come in with your assistance in terms of being able to sell, present, and bringing the other side, the other critical side of the business that is important to be able to grow the business. What are some of the earliest challenges that you started to face as you start to scale this business? You talked about, for example, you selling and then having to go and deliver. What are some of those challenges you're trying to face? And especially, I want to also think about some of the nuances of the fact that you're growing. Some people might not understand like the nuances of growing a business here versus growing a business in Africa that is quite sizable. What are some of the challenges you started to face in the early stages of scaling it?
Sure, that's a big one. Okay, so I'll start with the challenges that were directly associated to what I was doing in the organization. The biggest challenge was, so just for clarity, we did work at height, mostly using rope access technicians. So similar to rock climbing, a lot of redundancy built in, technically incredibly safe if done well. In fact, safer than scaffolding or ladder use in terms of injuries on site. But it was very new. So particularly in South Africa, so it had been used in the North Sea a lot in the oil and gas industry, but not terribly much anywhere else in the world. It was back then it was still a new way of doing things. So there was a lot of skepticism around it. There was a lot of fear that people would get injured and there would be liability associated to that. So we realized quite early on that we really needed to create a professional brand image for the organization. In fact, our tagline was professional rope access. So the first challenge was building that brand and building that messaging so that when we could engage with people, and it goes back to that key person of influence we were talking about earlier in terms of having, when you arrive, there is already an understanding of who you are and what you do. So we worked very, very hard on our branding itself, on our visibility. We had the curse and the blessing of a very strong competitor who started, I think, just before we started. He was a German guy who was very strong on his own brand as well. And because of that, we were able to imitate or compete, and we were consistently trying to one-up one another in terms of how we built that brand and that brand recognition. So we spent a lot of time and energy on signboards outside all of the projects we were working on, and those progressively got bigger and clearer as well in terms of what we were doing and the services we were offering. So that was the first real challenge that I dealt with. I feel we did a fantastic job in getting that messaging right. We worked really hard on, because we were very visual, and it is a visual medium in terms of being able to share your story without necessarily having to have too much wording to it. It worked very, very well when we were able to integrate social media and platforms like that, where you just had to put a photograph of a guy up on a 20-story building, and people are interested in it and want to look at it and want to know more about it. What we did was we used that as our canvas, and we went with very bright yellow overalls that were heavily branded as well. And one of the proudest moments for me was driving through the CBD on any given day, and you would see 40, 50, maybe even 100 SkySight guys hanging from buildings in and around the city, and you could tell who they were because they were yellow. So we had really captured the market through our branding. So that was a challenge that I think we did really well in. Some of the other challenges, certainly around quality of labor. So again, a challenge, but also an absolute privilege to be able to work with technicians who, if they were hardworking and they were intelligent enough and obviously had a head for heights, you were able to offer them a salary that they would never be able to get working as a normal cleaner or working as, even within some fairly skilled professions, because of the danger pay associated to it, and because there was such a big margin in profit between scaffolding and the cost of erecting scaffolding and the way we could do things. We were then able to pass that back to our employees. Mm-hmm. So while it was a challenge often to find, to upskill and to maintain and retain staff, it was also a real privilege to be able to see people come up within your organization and learn skills and be able to completely change the life that they would have otherwise had, which is, again, why leadership for me is such an important thing, because having gone through that journey of being able to change people's lives and seeing the effect leaders can have on other people, it certainly has impacted my regard for leadership. And as we were talking earlier, coming from Africa, where often leadership has a little bit to be desired in terms of whether or not it's actually serving the people that it's there in place for, it's something that just really highlighted that for me again. So that was a challenge in terms of, you're dealing with people who sometimes aren't going home to a warm bed and who maybe haven't eaten a full meal, and you're placing them in an environment that's inherently very dangerous. That can be very challenging. Mm-hmm. And I won't lie, there were many nights where I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking someone's fallen off a building, and it's something you learn to live with, mm-hmm. but it is challenging. What we did was and this worked for all the other challenges. So there were a number of challenges that came. Cash flow at one point was quite a large challenge, particularly as we were building the other business within the organization that required a lot of capital to get that up and running, and that at one point was very stressful, to the point where I actually went to my wife and said, "I'm not sure if we're going to make this month, and we might need to sell the house." And her response was, "That's fine. Whatever happens, happens. Oh, wow. We'll go live with your folks. We'll make it work." And it was one of the most powerful moments, because it actually killed that fear completely with me, because my biggest fear was letting my family down. But once I understood where my wife stood on that, it actually just made it a lot easier for me to be logical and not think emotionally anymore. So cash flow was an issue which we again learned how to deal with quite carefully, which was fantastic, because when COVID did come around and they locked Cape Town down for quite literally months where no one could work, we had a war chest that was big enough to get us through that period quite comfortably. And then the other challenges were just obviously, from an operational perspective, we did grow quite quickly, and while labor was the one issue in terms of qualified, skilled labor who could actually do the work that was required, the other issue was the quality control and the management systems within the organization that meant that we were running something that was sustainable. So we spent a fairly large amount of time, energy, and effort on bringing in systems like ISO 9001, 2000, so that there was quality assurance. We also went quite deep into our actual systems themselves. So, how did we manage our customers? Which CRMs did we choose to use? What was the job flow? And then obviously, being a very safety conscious industry, we spent a lot of time and energy on that paperwork and the requirements to keep our staff safe, because that was our biggest liability, right? If somebody dies and you're found at fault, that's it. That's the game is over. You've lost. So we became an incredibly system-driven business, and I think that was, and I'm sure it's music to your ears because this is what you do. But that was what defined our scaling from being completely reactional to being intentional. We were able to analyze where we had bottlenecks, and we were able to implement systems that could bypass that, or that could create an environment for people to make decisions at their level, but understanding what was the sort of the long-term vision and long-term goal for the company.
While you're going through these challenges, there's a lot of stuff that is evolving in yourself as a business leader. There's a lot of evolution as a team. What was your evolution like as a leader? You started off, there's a few people, not as much complexity, and then you start to bring in a business that is potentially very heavily risky, regulated, and there's more people, there's more money going out, there's all these challenges you're going through. What's going through your mind as a leader, and how do you evolve as a leader?
Yeah, for me, it was not as intentional as I would have liked it to be, if I'm being honest. A lot of the lessons that I learned were learned through potentially doing it the wrong way, and then learning there's a better way.
Yeah. What was the wrong way? I'm curious.
So the construction industry in South Africa, particularly when I started, was fairly military in its organizational management. People are not treated very well, or weren't. It evolved and it changed a lot. Safety, when we started, was less of an issue than it was down the line. So safety became critical on all the sites we were, whereas before it was an optional nice to have. But very much the leadership style that I was presented when I started was, and not within our organization, but with our clients.
The general culture in the industry, yeah.
We did a lot of work. So we would subcontract to big construction companies. So, for example, they would be building a big high-rise building in the city. They'd want to get their scaffolding down, but there would still be snagging work, there'd still be cleaning work, and potentially painting and other services that we could do via rope access. They would reduce the cost of all that scaffolding, remove it all, and we could continue working while they finished off the inside. A lot of those contractors, the way that they worked was just heavy. It was a lot of shouting, a lot of screaming, very little respect for the people that were working in the organization. And I assimilated some of that, not intentionally, and it's certainly not my character, I don't think. And I learned very quickly that didn't get results. It was, it wasn't a long journey that. It was fairly quick. The feedback was very quick on it as well. And I think that was the hardest lesson for me to learn, because it's not great when you have people give you feedback about the way that you're treating other people. It was a difficult period, but I'm so grateful for it, because I learned so much, and I think the outcome from that was the importance of the people within an organization, and it really changed the way that we as an organization did things. So that was one of the first sort of really, if I think back, one of the most important lessons that I learned. I was also very fortunate, and just to be clear, like, this was not me. I had partners within the organization. They each had strengths that they carried, which meant that it wasn't, I don't think that we experienced the type of pressure that a single founder would experience. And I'm very grateful for it, and I certainly would encourage people to consider going on your own versus going in partnership, because I find that you just have, even if it's just a single person, someone who can, when you're having a bad day, they can pick you up, they can give you that energy, and they can, if they're good at what they do, you can leave them to be accountable for what they do. So I think it's also important that I'm just clear on that this wasn't the Simon show. This was very much, I was part of a team that worked together. The other journey I think we had, I mean, we've discussed systems and how important systems were, but the big one for me personally was learning how to let go. So actually learning how to delegate to people, and how to create an environment for them to thrive.
Was there something that, because often we tell people that they need to delegate, they need to let go, and they need to do all these things, but sometimes it takes certain things to happen, or for people to realize that, okay, I need to do this. Was there certain series of events that really made you, like, what I'm trying to get to is what the epiphanies that goes into your mind that made you think, that made you make that it's time to let go, it's time to do this. Because I think that is what really, a lot of people know they need to, but they don't do it. What was the thing that kind of broke it for you, and you decided, nah, it's time to do it? I think for me, like I would say, for example, for me, it was a case of like I overwhelmed so much and I burnt out, and I was like, and then you're burnt out, and then you can't do stuff, right?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you're forced to delegate because you got to that point. And for you, it might not be at a point in time where it got that worse. It might be certain epiphanies. I want to try and capture what really went to your mind that got
it's a
that
funny,
tipped the needle.
It's a funny thing that you sometimes have to go too far in order to recorrect. Like we see it in society as well, that sometimes society will go too far to the left or the right, and then there's a bit of compensation that happens over time. I think the big problem for me was I thrive off of pressure. So I love it. I love the feeling of deadlines. I love the feeling of having projects and running with them. It almost fuels me with adrenaline. And so...
Were you a sports person, or did you play sports, or or is it ADHD? Because I'm
I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
By saying that, it's not my natural nature. So actually my natural nature, I think, is certainly, if I think back to when I was younger, I would be late all the time. I was generally not very system driven at all. I would, I was fairly messy with a lot of, my possessions and so on. But I think what turned the dial for me were a couple of things. Firstly, it got to a point where I was working full days, operationally in the business, visiting sites, visiting clients, putting proposals together. And then I had all the admin that I needed to do. And I would get home at 5 o'clock. I had, at that point, a young family. I loved bathing my kids. So I'd bath the kids, give them their story, have dinner. And then I would sit down at my desk and work sometimes till 2, 3 in the morning. And I was doing that fairly consistently. So you start to feel that in your health, for sure. It's not sustainable. I think that was the biggest thing, was that the way that it was a slow boil to that point, and it was totally self-inflicted. It wasn't expected of me. It was an internal expectation I had that I wanted to deliver, and that I wasn't. I think potentially it might have even been I wasn't confident enough to pass it on to other people, because I wanted to prove my value within the organization. There's probably some psychology behind it that I'm not, that's subtle.
Is it, where does that come from? Is it like you've got a chip on your shoulder somewhere, or something that you're trying to, or because I always wonder, because I'm a little bit like that. Sometimes I'll push myself to the very nth degree, and then at some point it's like, what am I trying to prove here? Like,
it's very scenario driven for me. So I wouldn't say that I'm a competitive person in everything, but where I am competitive, I'm exceptionally competitive. And I guess, and I wasn't like I was competing against anybody. It was just I guess it also goes back to, and this is one of the things when we were talking about, the difference potentially with an African country and building a business versus here. We had grown fairly quickly. So over a period of time, we got to, so we kind of went through that typical stage of 20 employees and then started to scale a bit more. And then we had some really big projects that scaled us up to a couple of 100 people. A lot of them would be living paycheck to paycheck. So I knew that if I didn't get the work in and I didn't deliver the work, these guys wouldn't eat. And that's a fairly, it's enough of a motivation for you to want to get things right. And I think that was a big part of the motivation for me to keep pushing myself, because I formed a lot of really good, strong relationships with a lot of the people that we worked with. Although we were very different and had different upbringings, not all of them, many of them were very similar to me, but a lot of the guys who were in the teams, we had really strong relationships. They would come to my house and we'd spend time together. And I think, that feeling of responsibility certainly translated into that drive there. In sport, I did do martial arts quite competitively, to the point where I actually fought in world champs. So that was actually part of my journey as well. So when I got to the point where I was feeling like it was no longer sustainable, I was also we had brought these systems in which were working really well. So I started to see the benefit of having good systems. I was a little bit on the fence initially when it came to some of the operating systems that businesses implement. So, when we initially did our values and our vision, and, we did it a bit later on in the journey of the business, not right at the beginning. And I was a bit skeptical in terms of what value it actually brings. But the amazing thing was, after doing it and going through that process, how much easier decision-making became. and it's something I'll come back to a bit later on because it touches very much in terms of where we are with the Intentional Leaders Network. But having seen those systems and having seen how having just a more structured existence as an entity was, I had also decided to or found myself back in training martial arts, which I had done previously, and through, I guess, my coach pushed me a little bit to start competing, and through that I found that I was really enjoying it. And the more that I was competing, and sort of moving from just sort of small competitions to sort of regional and then national, I obviously had to start training a lot more because it's not the type of sport you want to do when you're not physically capable. And that required quite a bit of my time and attention and focus. So the martial art discipline was really good for me because it forced me to become a lot more intentional about where I spent my time, how I spent my time. I became a lot more regimented in terms of even just things like I stopped drinking alcohol because I could feel the difference in my body when I trained. And for the 6 or 7 years that I competed, I just basically didn't touch alcohol for that whole period. And while that might seem like a big thing, it really wasn't at all. It was just simply this is the life I want to lead. These are the decisions that I'm making because of the goals that I have. And yeah, so I guess that's a very long-winded way of giving you the answer, but it wasn't like there was one thing that popped up. It was just a culmination of a lot of things within my surroundings that allowed me to realize that I wasn't being efficient with the way that I was doing things. And actually what it meant was I wasn't doing my job very well. Because I was so stretched, I wasn't focusing on the things that I needed to focus on to allow the people within the organization to get really good and focus on the things that they needed to. So once we were able to make that change, and I right up until the end, I remained very involved in certain projects, whether it was a client relationship or the projects just were fairly advanced and needed someone who had experience in them. And I also really enjoyed that, and I liked keeping that connection with the teams out on the ground, and also keeping that connection with your client base. Yeah, it was a very interesting journey to find and again, I'm going to go back to martial arts because for me there was something that happened there when you're able to physically train but also mentally train at the same time, which there aren't a lot of sports that give you that type of conditioning. It just had an impact on the rest of my life as well.
I'm curious, when you start to delegate and let go, what are some of the roles you had to allow now? What are some of the things you had to what are some of the first few things you had to take off your plate?
Yeah.
What I want to try and get to is to get someone that is struggling to delegate, to give them some sort of a clear roadmap.
Yeah. In
terms of and I know it's a case by case basis, but okay, if they can draw inspiration from the fact that I got rid of this, I got rid of that, and then these are some of the benefits there's some of the initial short to medium term benefits that I started to benefit from doing that, and the uplift from letting go of some of these things.
Yeah.
Are you able to talk into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it all began when I went to go and spend some time in Dubai. It was at the time that they were building the Burj Al Arab, the big, the Burj Khalifa, not the Burj Al Arab.
Yes, yeah.
I stayed in Jumeirah Beach where the Burj Al Arab is.
Yeah.
I started so we had a couple of meetings with some of the local construction companies there, and I was very interested at the model that they had produced. So the structure has mostly a 30% government arm ownership within it. And then they have tiered services, but all under a single umbrella. So you have this umbrella company that does all of your plumbing, all of your electrics, all of your construction work, all of your building maintenance. They're different entities, but they're all within the same, they're held by the same holding company. And it got me thinking about the way in which we had structured our business. And that was where we started to build out divisions. So we had always had our marketing speak to the various different services that we did. So hanging signage, high-rise signage on high-rise buildings or big billboards, that was the one side of the business. we actually installed the systems that people would hang from. So whether it was a gondola or whether it was rope access anchors that people could hang themselves from, those have quite a lot of regulation around them. So they have to be installed to standards, they have to be tested to standards annually. So that was a little pocket of business that we did. And then we did building maintenance, so cleaning, construction work, and obviously the just general maintenance. So we did a lot of, in Cape Town particularly, there was a real boom in the 70s in terms of construction. And a lot of the buildings that were built there were big concrete clad buildings. With it being on ocean on either side, there's a lot of salt. That salt obviously leads to something called spalling, which is degradation of your concrete structures. So what happens is your rebar starts to rust, and as it rusts, it expands, and that actually pops the concrete off of the building, which can fall on people's heads, etc. So it's and to repair it isn't simple. You have to, there's quite a process that you have to go through. We realized that by divisionalizing the business, we would be able to have skilled technicians who we could really make specialists in what they do, so that they could become more efficient, faster, and better at it. There's always going to be overlap, and there was. We had sort of these gold ticket technicians who you could send to pretty much any job and they would be able to get it done for you. But for the most part, we started to structure the business around that. So we said, okay, we're going to divisionalize the business into cleaning, into building refurbishment, into anchors, and then rope access supply and signage. The rope access supply, we would often supply technicians to a project. So they would actually be managed by the project managers themselves. We would just supply them and make sure that they were safe. So that was the first step that we needed to take, because that then informed the strategy of how we would start to build people to fulfill roles, so that we could grow those divisions, and then we could step back a tier and allow that middle management to do what it was needing to do. So unfortunately, with it, there were two challenges that we had. The one was the oil and gas industry. So it doesn't matter how much you pay somebody on a land-based job. If they get offered a job in the North Sea, or they get offered a job in North Africa or West Africa, the rates that they get paid by these international oil companies, we just couldn't compete with it. It would be just, it's just not possible. So we did find that from time to time, we would just lose a whole chunk of our technicians, because they would be a project that was coming on board, and they would, we were known to have good technicians because we'd spent and invested a lot of time and energy in training up and assessing. So we actually, as part of your job interview, you had a written test, you had a practical test, and we would have, so we actually adjusted our warehouse so that we could actually have our more experienced technicians take the potential applicants through this process. So that was another way that we were able to just add an extra level in terms of expanding the amount of people we had in the organization, but making sure that we weren't compromising on quality or compromising on safety. Because unfortunately, some of the training schools, you get the certificate, but you really should not be doing anything close to what we were requiring our staff to do. Through that, we were then able to build our team leaders. So rope access naturally has a leveled, so you have a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 technician, based on your experience and based on being able to pass the curriculum that you need. So having technicians who had grown within the business, we could then understand the skill set that they had and understand the environments they could work in, and then we could allocate them within these divisions. And then obviously the management itself, there was a level of training. So we did it in a staggered manner, and that was quite strategic. So we started with cleaning, because cleaning was the easier of the services that we did, and we brought in an HOD, so he headed up that department, and that became his little thing. And what we did, which I'm also really proud of, and I think it's a really good model for people who are looking to expand, was we created a business within a business for him. So he got a profit share of the division, and it was very much his baby. So he still reported to us. There were still structures within the organization. We all worked out of the same office, but he had I don't want to say carte blanche, but he had a lot of room to work with his clients. And there was the beauty of it was that a lot of the clients overlapped as well. So from division to division, you might have a client who you clean their building, and the work, you're working there and you happen to see he's got some paint peeling, and then you send the rep from the painting department, and he goes and chats to them and says, would you like a quote on refurbing your building? So that was, the strategy that we took, I think, was really about creating these pods within the business, and then building the leadership into it. And that just took time. So you had to invest the time into getting somebody to the point where they were skilled enough to run it. So the gentleman who actually ended up taking over the building refurbishment side of the business, which was one of the more technical aspects of work that we did, he actually started as just a deckhand. So he started as someone who was assisting us on a project that I had. And he just showed that he had all of the qualities that we needed in leadership, innately and also in terms of competence. So that process to get him to where he was able to actually run that division was a couple of years of actually molding him and priming him to that position. So nothing was quick.
Now, I'm really curious, because it sounds like your business, and for a lot of people, was very people heavy.
Yes.
It's pretty much...
They were our product.
Pretty much your people are your product. You're selling your people at a premium, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So obviously with managing people comes issues.
Yep.
It comes, it comes career management. It comes leadership training. And also there's something you mentioned that was very, very interesting, whereby you're almost constantly having to train people, because as soon as you get them good enough, someone is sniffing and wanting to get them, because obviously the oil and gas industry, someone else wants them. I'm curious in terms of what was your strategy, what was your people's strategy, and talk about what was your process of making sure you're always constantly building those teams. And most importantly, how do you start to develop that leadership pipeline? Do you bring external leaders from outside, or how do you groom people within the company and raise them up to a point in time whereby they can either start to become supervisors, team leaders? How do you create a culture whereby people are able to thrive and you're able to sort of constantly bring in more people? Because it looks like, it looks like there's a lot of churn.
Yeah.
And it might not be even a bad thing. It might not be a bad thing. It's like if you train them good enough, someone else wants them,
Yeah, so your assumptions are 100% correct. It was challenging. I think the underlying fundamental is, if you can build trust relationships with your employees, you're able to create a platform for dialogue to happen. So you're actually able to create a platform where people can be honest with you about what they're wanting to achieve and where they fit into your organization. Initially, we were quite resistant to the idea of training people up so they could go and work elsewhere, because we were really thinking about ourselves and we weren't thinking about them as people. Once we got over that and we realized that these people may go off and work on other projects and then potentially come back and bring that knowledge that they've learned back to our organization, that was a bit of a game changer. We also came to terms with, we had a very active HR manager, and we came to terms with the fact that there will be churn. So the nature of the work that we do means that people do cycle. We just built in the redundancies that were needed to make sure that whomever joined the organization was skilled enough to do what we needed them to do. So that was where those assessments, and it was a costly exercise to do that. Often we would have 10 people arrive and not a single one of them was fit for work. So, and you might do that 5 or 6 or 7 times, and it takes a lot of time and energy and money to fund that. But it was the process that we chose, and it worked. So we were able to keep our name within the industry and our brand within the industry as a respected brand. In terms of the offshore work, it's probably slightly similar to FIFO work here in Australia, but the difference is that it's not consistent. So some if you're lucky, you would get a rotation where you're 6 weeks on, 4 weeks off, or whatever it is. But a lot of it was project based. and that meant you might get a project where you're earning 10 times what you would have earned land-based, but then you lose the opportunity to continue working with an organization like ours, and then you sit at home for the next 2 years sometimes. So a lot of the staff who were our key core components, they had weighed up the difference between being at home with their family, being able to work hours that were within a normal working day, so they could go home and spend time with their families as well. They could have weekends off. We did a lot of weekend and after hours work as well, if I'm honest, but we were able to put it in routines so that it was shared amongst the load. So through that, I think we just learned how to, and again, it goes down to systems, how to work with the people who were representing our organization to find a win-win situation. So what was beneficial for them, what was beneficial for us. At no point did we make the decision to say let's not train this person any further, because there's always benefit in training them. And a lot of the technicians who would leave, if they left on a good note, in other words, they didn't just drop us, not let us know, they gave us time so that we could find someone to replace them. When they came back, they'd give us a call and we'd see where we could slot them in, because generally we had more work than technicians. So once we found that win-win, and again, it goes to company culture, where we really made the conscious decision to try and be as respectful of the staff working with us as we could, because as you said, they were our business. So while in certain instances we would be selling a result such as, your building is sound and doesn't leak and is painted and looks good, it was still the people that implemented it that were the product.
That's awesome. You've talked a lot about systems, and systems being a very key part of how you grew the business. I'm keen in terms of how your process of starting to roll out those systems, without obviously specifically talking about brands, whether it's a Microsoft or whatever. I wanted to sort of think about your high-level strategy of, like, in general, what sort of system do you start to layer in, and how do you go through that whole process of starting to systematize your business so that it can be able to operate a lot more efficiently? Were there any sort of business frameworks that you followed, things like the EOs of this world, the scaling up frameworks? Did you bring in mentors and consultants to help you roll out that kind of stuff? I'm very, very keen in terms of how you guys went out the process of rolling out systems, and what was the process like going through modernizing a business. And I know that systems is not something that ever finishes. You're always constantly, it's an evolving process, but I guess you have to have a certain baseline of systems. You feel like to get to a business to a certain level, there's a certain baseline you need, and then everything else becomes gravy.
So currently, the work that I'm doing is systems integration. So I go into organizations and I look at where they have bottlenecks, or where we can provide a system, either digital or just a system itself, to find a solution to smooth that out. I think the most important thing, and this we can again come back to with the Intentional Leaders Network, is around clarity. So you really need to, as an organization, have clarity on a couple of things. Firstly, you need to know who you are. So what are the values that you stand for? What is your long-term vision? What is your mid and sort of annual vision? And what are the objectives that you need to? So following OKRs or ROCs, or however you want to do it. But what are the main objectives that you're trying to achieve? Once you understand that, you then have context. Without context, it's very difficult to give anybody advice, because context gives you a lot of answers. So the reason why I'm such a big, why I'm so keen on values within organizations, is because what we found was it allowed, as we grew, and middle management and then management below them, it allowed them to make decisions at their level, because they understood what we stand for. So I think of it almost like if you're playing a game of football, your values are the outline, And anything you do outside there doesn't actually matter. So getting clear on that is quite important, and then getting clear on your vision. So where do you want to be, and having that long-term vision as well as the mid and short-term vision is really important, because you're not building systems for where you are. You're building systems for where you need to be, and you're also needing to build, as you know, working with digital systems, you can have a platform that could sustain X many users, but if you're talking about scaling up to 1,000 seats, that no longer becomes a solution that's viable. So a big part of it is really understanding where you are and then understanding where you need to get to. That then answers a lot of the questions that you need in terms of what systems are required and where they're required. The sort of the nuts and bolts of it, obviously, whatever system you're using for accounting, that's probably your base one primary system that you would employ. I think any business these days has to have that. And then depending on the type of business you are, whether you're more manufacturing, whether you're more service-based, then you would be looking at things like your CRM, or you'd be looking at things like your Business Central, or whatever your main single window is. With communication, there are just so many options as well. That whether you're Google Suite, whether you're Microsoft, whether you're even some of the other applications out there that are really good. I think it's less about the system and more about understanding what the outcome is. We can get caught up in the intricacies of a system, but at the end of the day, what gives you the best result in the shortest period of time and gives the best return on investment? That is always what I would look at is that. So in terms of frameworks, I mean, obviously, that framework follows the EOS framework quite well. Mm-hmm. And I know you had Mike on here, and I think he spoke about it a fair amount. So I don't think I need to go back on that too much. But certainly the principles are: understand where you are, who you are, understand where you need to get to, and then what is the best system, where you've got this friction, what is the best way to iron that out? That's it. It sounds simple. It's not easy, but that's the framework that I use, to be honest.
I'm grateful that you actually mentioned that part about not being easy, because you're working now on a coaching capacity and bringing a group of people together. You've worked with a lot of business owners now who are building the values and understanding what they need to be focusing on and not focus on. Why do you believe that's not easy? What are some of the challenges you're finding with people? Like, when you work with someone, there's a certain level of either it's a limiting belief, or whether it's a mindset, or whether it's status quo of the way they look at things. What are some of the things you have to dismantle in someone's belief system for them to be able to sort of make that?
Yeah, that's a complex question. EQ is obviously really important with the work that we do, and I think that's where I am able to add a bit of value. I'm not the super technical guy. Generally, the office that I work with is based in the UK, and that's where the technical side of it, and I present to them, and they then come back and say, these are the solutions we can look at. Limiting beliefs is something that's very interesting. It's something that I've been, again, quite privileged to be able to see people overcome. If you're born into a certain way of living, there's an expectation, and your personal limits that you put on yourself are generally dictated by that. Not always, but generally. This is again where, and I mean, I'm going to touch now on the Intentional Leaders Network, because this actually ties into it very much. There's a lot of evidence that talks to environment. So when you're in an environment, so let's say, for example, use Cape Town as an example. You grow up in an informal settlement in Cape Town. You've gone to a school where the teachers aren't very engaged. The facilities are very, very poor, and the quality of education you've got is fairly low. Everybody around you in your family are, if they're lucky, working, potentially not, and sharing accommodation in very close quarters. Your expectation of what is good is very different to someone who grew up in a 5-bedroom house with a big garden and a swimming pool, and who went to one of the best schools and maybe went to university. So that's where the stark contrast of South Africa gives a lot of, it really just shines a big spotlight on the environment and how that can dictate our limiting beliefs, but also how it can be overcome. And environment is a big part of it. So with the Intentional Leaders Network, what we actually do is get leaders out of their current environment. So that's a single day where we take them away. The first one's going to be up at Mount Lofty House. And there's a lot of evidence that proves that just removing environment gets your neural pathways to fire differently. So it allows your brain to start thinking in ways that it may not have otherwise thought. And where this becomes really important is when you start thinking about things like vision, because that's generally, if you're talking about limiting beliefs, that's where the limiting beliefs are going to start causing trouble, because your vision isn't as opportunistic as it could be, because you're only thinking of what you think you can achieve rather than. So there's a framework in which you can build and work with people to build their visions that helps them to remove those natural roadblocks that they would put in their own place.
Are you able to explore that for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions that's quite useful is if you ask somebody to give advice to themselves, but what it does is it just creates an extra barrier where they can see themselves objectively. So that's one tool that you can use. The other tool is that it's just a framing of how you ask a question. So instead of saying, what is your long-term vision for the next 7 to 8 years? You say, if there were no limitations, what would your perfect life look like? That gets the brain to function very differently because it removes the obstacles that you've placed in there. So if I was to say, Mike loves using this term where people underestimate what they can do in a year, but they overestimate what they can do in a year, but they totally underestimate what they can do in 3. Once you actually have clarity on what it is you're wanting to achieve, you can then start getting clear on what your strategy is. So if it's that, well, I didn't go to university, so I don't have the skill set to do the job that's my dream job, well, what can I do between now? I've got 7 years to do that or 10 years to do that. What can I put in place to actually build that skill up? That is where framing of it becomes very, very important. And there are nuances that are very small but make a very big difference to the outcome.
I'm still wanted to dwell on that a little bit in terms of, because I've had times when you've asked someone to imagine if there was no lack, if there was no limitations, where their life would be.
Yeah.
And some people, they're so, for lack of a better word, so stuck into like their routines and the things they're doing. And they could be, from all practical purposes, looking very successful from the outside.
Yes.
But some people really, really struggle with that, being able to visualize if you was to take away all the things that are holding you back, what would you be? Is there anything you could comment in terms of like helping someone break off that pattern?
I think the way in which we live now, everything is very immediate. So our expectations become quite immediate. We are not AI programs that can compute things, massive amounts of data in a very short period of time. Sometimes it's trusting the process. And the way that we structure the Intentional Leaders Network is that it is a process that, similar to a business. So let's take a business, because I'm just going to quickly touch on the Intentional Leaders Network's purpose, right? So the purpose of the Intentional Leaders Network is to create a space where leaders, so whether you're an operator, an owner, a founder, or just in a leadership role within an organization, as we spoke about in the beginning, the impact that you can have on the people around you is massive. The way that you lead them makes a very, very big difference. So when we first started looking at this, we had a discussion around our values and why we're doing this. And this isn't what we do to make money. It's something that we're doing because we've seen the results of it one-on-one, and we'd like to take that to a larger group and then incorporate the network as a group to actually enhance that environment and to make it stronger and to make it last longer. And exactly to answer your question, to allow people to revisit things because it's a process. These things don't necessarily always happen over time. You don't go and see a psychologist and suddenly get over childhood trauma the next day. It's a process of breaking through it. What we do is we give you the tools that are, so using the model of like an EOS, for example, so as an operating system, using the model that you would use for a business, what we found, and again, both Mike, myself, we do a fair amount of consulting with business owners. We spend a fair amount of time with them. And in our discussions with one another, we found that there certainly are a lot of common issues that arise that we feel this would provide a solution to. So those issues would be a sense of isolation. So if you don't have partners or potentially you don't get on very well with your partners, you're struggling to find people who you can talk to about the problems that you have in an honest, open way, or you're struggling to find people who actually provide value to those conversations. We've already discussed environment. So you're stuck in your environment where you've become reactive, either unknowingly or you've just become complacent. Maybe it's, and again, we're talking about the human here. We're not talking about the person in the organization. Yeah. We're talking about the person themselves. They have family lives. They have health, mental and physical, that they need to maintain in order to be able to show up every day and be, I was telling you earlier, I pulled my back out. I haven't slept great. It means I'm not showing up as I would if I'd had a good hour's sleep or good sleep last night. So all of these things impact how they show up, and that then impacts out. So the way that I think of the island is sort of like a lake, and we're throwing these pebbles, being the leaders, and they're just creating these ripples that ripple out. So we've got the environment that we're talking about in terms of giving them an opportunity to remove themselves from that day-to-day. I don't want to say chaos, because it doesn't necessarily have to be that. And like you were saying earlier, what was the one thing that got me to realize I was not, in a sustainable, I wasn't working in a sustainable manner. We're hoping to get people before they get to that point. We're hoping to get people who they just know something's off. They know they could be doing better. Perhaps it's a relationship. Maybe they've gone to see the doctor and he said, look, you need to work on this. Or maybe it's even a mental health thing where you actually just need to focus a little bit more time on your mental training. With all of these, removing them from the environment gives them an opportunity to explore that in a way that they wouldn't in their day-to-day. It also gives them permission to do it. So we find a lot that people will put so much energy, effort, and focus into their business, and they don't give themselves the same level of respect that they do for their organization. And what this is about is saying the long game requires you to be consistent. It requires you to keep showing up. And in order to do that, you have to look after that person. So once you've gone through this offsite with us, so we're working with identity. So the initial phase, looking at that identity piece, looking at who you are, where you are, what your values are, what your long-term vision is. So all the things that you would do with your organization, we're saying, okay, well, take those same tools that work within your organization and bring them into your personal life and have a look at them within again, a systematized manner, but have a look at that and let's just explore that data. Then in the offsite, they're given an opportunity to really delve quite deeply into that and to start to build an understanding of who they need to become to be the person that they envision themselves being. Mm-hmm. And then we give them the tools to actually implement that. And that's where the magic happens, because anyone can have a vision or a goal but without a good system and without the tools to implement it, you're learning by getting things wrong rather than not. And then that's all sort of encased within the network, where you're also getting the support of a network. Yeah. You're getting the accountability of a network. So there's a big accountability piece that we work into it. And you're also able to share your learning. So like-minded people in the room together, they're able to share their own personal journeys. And through that, they're able to not offer advice, but to just share that learning with the others in the cohort. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the concept. So I don't know if you can see, but there's sort of this progression of saying, we know this works with organizations. We've taken it and applied it to people, and we've seen that there's fantastic, we've got some really good results with doing this one-on-one. Now what we're saying is we're going to scale that into a network environment where that network can really provide that support and that structure to it to make sure that the people can sort of keep evolving. Mm-hmm. And then just to finally close out the point that I was trying to make, that then is quarterly reviewed. So the review of the process, because we're ever evolving, and because, as I said, this is not something that necessarily you're going to get your answer the first time you go through the process. You, like a business does, you quarterly review. So you take a look at what's changed. You take a look. We're big proponents of integrated lives. So we don't talk about balance. And I love this analogy where I can't remember who it was, but someone was talking about a balanced life, and they said, well, I think of a balanced life a little bit like I think of balanced music. So if you've got a piano in front of you and you want to play every key at least once because that's fair, you might not make something that sounds very good, whereas you could make a beautiful melody just playing 3 or 4 keys. And sometimes in life you have to really focus on an aspect of your life in order to push yourself forward, or to push an aspect of your life forward. And we're not here to judge that. So we're not here to say you have to, you can't be more focused on your business than anything else. We're saying if you're going to do it intentionally and do it in a way that's sustainable. And as with most things, seasons change, people change, environment changes. So what was working for you, and I mean, we know this with business as well, what works when you're a smaller entity, once you start hitting a certain amount of employees, you then need to change and you need to adapt to the challenges that come with a slightly larger organization. It's very much the same within people's life cycles, that things change and they need to adapt. So the way that we've built it out is that they're able to then review, take the data, take what they've learned, see what's worked, see what hasn't, and continue to stack that progress as they progress through the network.
As a leader in a business, it's very easy for you to be the biggest bottleneck.
Yes.
Because if you're not constantly evolving, if you're not working in yourself, it's kind of almost like, I remember this, have you ever read that book called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldberg? It's
no.
Really good. It talks about constraints theory.
Right.
But essentially, it's kind of like if you don't develop the leaders, if you don't develop the founders within a business.
Yeah.
And because I think there's a lot of people tend to think we can have complete separation. This is my personal life and this is the business life. And often I'll find that whatever is happening in your personal life will inadvertently spill into your business every single time. And if you cannot develop the leaders, if you cannot develop the leader, they will end up being a bottleneck of the business and holding the business back.
Yeah.
And that I've seen a lot of people held back by their own personal things. But I also like the way you talked about like being able to balance, being an integrated self. And I think you also answered the question I was asking you about like before, when I asked you about like how do you get people to snap, and you talked about it's a process.
Yeah.
Trusting the process.
Yeah.
Like, so nothing really happens.
Yeah.
Nothing also happens once.
What's interesting is that many of these people will trust the process within their organization. So
Absolutely.
They'll take that process, they'll adopt it, they'll commit to it 100%. They won't bother to take the time to apply the exact same principles to how they live. And that for us, and again, I don't claim to have any of the sort of the back end. This was very much Mike Scott's brainchild. He did it himself. So he actually, he had reached a point where he had sold his business and he realized that he needed to sort of refocus himself. So he was in that period of change. And he thought the most logical way to do it would be, well, let's take these business systems that I've used and let's apply it to my life. And he did that with great success for himself, and then started using it with clients, and that's sort of how this has evolved. So yeah, it's strange that people would commit to it within an organization, but then not have that same level of commitment for themselves. And as you say, the problem of evolving, of leadership needing to evolve with an organization, it's not something that is an easy. It's something that you again, having that space to remove yourself from the environment and get that clarity, you can then start to see what it is that you need to do, what your real purpose is, what your objectives really are. And through that, you can then understand what you need to say yes to and commit to, what you need to say no to, and then where you can delegate. So what can I delegate, and to whom do I delegate that? Yeah. That requires that space to remove yourself and think about it. So yes, that should be happening within an organizational structure. Those conversations should be happening. But sometimes if you're a smaller scale up, or if you're in a position where you've built a pretty decent business on your own, it's often hard to make that time for yourself to actually think about it. But again, we're not just talking in business, we're talking in life as well. We're talking relationships, we're talking, your children evolve to have different needs as they get older. How do you adapt to that? Your relationships evolve, even your things like your health and the time that you need to dedicate to physical health. It's all for change to happen. And I'll go back to your question, because I think the actual answer is, in order for change to be effective, you have to have self-awareness, which is why we focus on identity initially, because once you've got clear on your identity, and then your behavior. So I can identify as something, it doesn't mean that's who I am. So you can identify as something, you can have the reality of where you are, and then you can have your vision. And in order to get that transition, or to make that change, you need to have the self-awareness of where you fit into between those three. And that allows you to then go, all right. And it's not easy. It's very difficult to be self-aware. We spoke earlier about, some of my challenges as a leader, and getting feedback from people saying, I wasn't treating people in a way that was respectful. That was a very hard thing to hear, but it allowed me to change. And without that conversation, I wouldn't have changed, or I wouldn't have been, it certainly wouldn't have been as quick a change, and I wouldn't have been as self-aware. So that process, I think, is really critical to being able to get the change that you're hoping for.
I'm curious, and this is something that I think people should understand. Why do you think people really struggle with giving themselves that space to be able to go and start to work on themselves? Because I think if people can break that frame in terms of why they're struggling to do that, I think a lot of people would give themselves more permission to be able to do the work they need to do themselves, so that they can eventually be able to get the success they did. Is it a personal worth? Is it like I feel I'm not worth it kind of issue? Is it what in your experience have you found? Because I'm sure you have to break that somehow in you.
Yes.
To feel like I'm worthy of this. I need to do this. I'm trying to break that frame, especially for someone who might be considering your program and thinking, should I? Shouldn't I? And because a lot of the objections we have for ourselves when you're doing something is a lot of them are internal and not necessarily to do with you might say to someone that this is worth this much to help you do these things, but then at the end of the day they've got their own internal monologue that's going. I want to try and speak to the conversations going in someone's head that is kind of stopping them from giving them that permission to sort of say, you know what, I should do this.
I think it's a complex question, and I don't think it's one size fits all.
Absolutely.
I think there's going to be different reasons for different people.
Absolutely.
I can give an example of somebody who quite literally put a post out saying, I'm not going to give too much detail, but they were at an event from one of their kids, and they were looking for tools. They literally said, I'm looking for tools that can help me just get disassociated from work when I'm actually meant to be focusing on family. That would be the perfect candidate for what we do, because we can provide those tools. Quite literally, we give you those tools. But even if you go to that person, approach them and say, we've got this solution, this is what it is, it might not be the right timing for them. Speaking from personal experience, having worked in an organization for nearly 20 years, it's a very long road, but you get stuck in that environment, and it's a little bit of you can't see the wood for the trees sometimes. So your perspective is limited to, we are just a culmination of our habits, right? So like, and there's some way smarter people than me who talk about this, but when you look at a human and you look at the way in which we present ourselves, someone could call it character, someone could call it personality. What it is it's a set of learnt behaviors that are repeated time and time again that create grooves in our brains, that create habits. You can change how you speak, you can change how you present yourself, certain physical aspects to your body you can change as well. These things are all habit based. So if you can change your habits, you're 90% there. The trick is being able to identify those habits and what they are. So it's almost like the solution is also the problem, because you're ingrained in these habits. I think there's also a piece to that question around some of the messaging that certainly I was given as a younger person, and I'm not sure if it's the same. I think it's different now, but certainly when I was young, the idea of a successful businessman was someone who worked crazy hours, who was, didn't sleep much, maybe like you're a bit like Elon Musk and you sleep in the back of your, while that makes for great storytelling, it doesn't make for sustainable or healthy life. And one of the biggest sort of aha moments you asked me about earlier, and I've just jumped into my mind, was one of our trainers used to do something to help us with performance, and it was imagining your own death. So you would imagine your own death very vividly, who's with you, and then you look back. And the idea was, the framing of it was, one would look back to that moment in time, which was just before I was going to fight in nationals, and you would think how you felt if you won, if you lost, and if you knew you didn't give it your best. Which would you feel best? And generally everybody goes to, as long as you give it your best, you're going to feel proud of what you did, right? Where I went was, wow, I feel like maybe I should be spending some more time with my kids and the people that I care about. And so it brought up a whole lot of other things for me that, potentially were quite important to me making some of those changes we spoke about earlier. So it's really difficult. Like, sometimes you need to run into a brick wall in order to realize that you need to change. Sometimes it's conditioning or messaging that we've been given. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's also perspective. So why do you do what you do? Why are you building a business? So you're building a business because it's something you genuinely deeply care about and you love it, and you can see the results of it. That to me, I can probably understand self-sacrifice more than I could for, I'm building this big tech company that's going to make me lots of money. And why am I doing that? Well, I'm doing it for my kids, or I'm doing it for, the people that I love, or you could even be honest and say I'm doing it because I want tons of money, which is fine. But if you're doing it to the detriment of yourself, and the only real asset we ever own is time, then is that a logical thing? So it's very difficult. I mean, it's almost like the people who need this the most are probably the people who won't want to do it, because it's challenging, it's confronting, it's not easy, it's a difficult process to go through, and it's really, from what we've seen, it appeals to people who are consistently wanting to level up, they're consistently wanting to improve, and they're not scared of that friction that is needed to create that result. So yeah, that's a very long-winded answer, but that's sort of, it's a complex question.
No. I really appreciate in terms of going through the different things. Like I said, there's a lot of factors that goes into someone deciding that they need to invest in their lives. And like I said, we can be very good at holding ourselves back.
Yeah.
And either thinking we don't deserve it or whatever it is going through someone's mind. As we start to conclude, you've talked about, like, in your business, having, grown business with partners and having people that growing with people, having that community around you, like having people. What's been I'm always very curious, because I've never been quite successful with doing business partnerships. What was a key to success in maintaining those partnerships and making sure that you're always able to have that group of people around you that can help you move forward with what you're trying to build?
That's a very good question, and it's difficult is the answer. But it's incredible.
It's a marriage, essentially.
It's actually,
or not.
I always say to people, partnership is different to a marriage in that you spend more time with your partners than you do with the person you married. In general,
pretty much,
if you think about it.
Yeah.
So I think of my old partners back in South Africa like family. In fact, again, it's such a deep relationship. You really do get to know people very, very well. So you get to know how they deal with money. You get to know whether they're generous or not, whether they're fair or not. You really get to see what someone's made of when you're in a partnership with them. I was very fortunate to have partners who I respect. You learn to compromise, because there is a lot of compromise. I would be lying if I said everything was easy and simple. There was a lot of difficult discussions, but I think it teaches you to embrace that in a way, because difficult discussions lead to good results, and not discussing things generally leads to festering wounds that then become bigger problems. So respect is by far for me the biggest. And I think also respect and authenticity are some of the bigger indicators for whether someone is going to be successful in leadership. So if they have alignment to their values and to who they are as a human, that tends to resonate, and people tend to respect that, because you're just being authentic. So certainly that was a big part of it, was that there was a genuine respect between us for one another. And I think we on the most part, really liked one another. We all had our quirkinesses and our challenges. Being on a journey like building a business with people who you respect and you trust allows you to work in a way that's very different to working with people who you don't trust or you don't respect. So I think that is probably the biggest factor. If I would say, as you have to be really careful with who you choose to marry, you have to be really, really careful who you choose to get into business with, because it's not easy, and it certainly can be tested. But if you've had enough hard times with them, it gives you that confidence to know that it doesn't matter what something throws at you, you can get through it. For me, leaving the business was one of the hardest things I've done. It felt a bit like, I wouldn't say leaving a child, because that's different, but it felt like leaving something that I'd built behind, and leaving people who I really cared about behind. But I'm glad to say that I was able to exit in a way that was, everybody, I think, felt that it was fair, and where I still have, really strong relationships with the people who remained.
I want to go back to the intentional leadership, intentional leadership network, and obviously a fantastic program. I have a lot of regard for you and Mike and what you're doing, and hopefully people watching this will be able to get value. We'll put some links and all that
Cool, thank you.
in the show notes. But I'm also keen to find out if someone is not able to have the opportunity to be part of a good supportive network like that, and they
Yes.
wanted to take some, I mean, they might not be eligible to join now this cohort, but they wanted to start to take some actionable steps in their lives and their business right now, specifically more their life as a leader.
Yes.
To start to level up and be able to sort of be the leader they're supposed to be the person, the father, the son, the husband, the wife, or the person they want to be able to achieve the success they want to be. What are some of the things you suggest to someone? Okay, these are some of the things I think you need to these are the things you need to start to think about. These are some of the things you need to start to do in your life right now on your own, that could potentially help you to start to level up, whether they become a better candidate for your program next time, or something they can start to do with themselves right now. Yeah.
Well, look, I think the first thing is we're trying not to be exclusive,
Of course.
but at the same time, and we're still modeling this. Our aim is we know we can reach the most people by starting at the top. So that's why we're doing that. It doesn't necessarily mean that the program will stay designed only for that level of person. At the moment, it makes sense financially, and it makes sense in terms of the impact that we know we can deliver. We're not looking for people who... We're looking for people who are open to the content. So I think that's the first thing. Like, we're looking for people who will embrace it. So yes, there is a selection criteria that we apply, but at the same time, we encourage everyone to apply and see whether or not they're a good fit. And even if they're not, there might be other things on the pipeline that we can then include them in. In terms of what you can do right now, I would say it is hard to get self-awareness on your own. So there are lots of people out there who offer services that can help you with that. I think self-awareness is really, really important. So understanding who you are, understanding, and we've got these amazing machines in our pockets right now where we can ask questions to models that are able to give us really, really intelligent answers. So you could potentially just, talk to some AI and see what comes out of that. But the idea is to understand where you want to get to, what your purpose is. So why is something important to you, and what do you need to do in order to attain that? That'll start to answer a lot of questions for you around your strategy. So once you understand your vision, you understand who you need to become. Once you understand who you need to become, you can then start stacking your habits. So you can say, these are the habits that I need in order to become that person. And then you can build out processes. We've obviously got this formulated within the program. But, Mike did a podcast on it and how he did it. This is certainly a progression of that. But there are tools out there, and there is certainly some information out there that people could listen to. Otherwise, contact us, and we'll see where and how we can help you. We, as I said in the beginning, this isn't what we're doing to make money. This is what we're doing because we've seen the effects of it, and that gives us a lot of purpose. So if there's anyone who wants to reach out, they can reach out to myself, they can reach out to Mike, and we can see our other partner, Troy, he's actually a medical practitioner as well. So he comes with a whole different area of skills and expertise as well, and he can add a lot of value there as well. So we're wanting to help. Obviously we have jobs and need to pay bills, but at the same time, where we can, we're happy to help whom we can.
That's awesome. As we conclude, my final question is, what sort of impact do you want to make in this world as family man, as businessman? What sort of impact do you want to make?
Yeah, that's a cool question. Having had to learn lessons the hard way with limited support or mentorship or guidance, I have a deep appreciation for being able to put a system in place that gives you good results and is tried and tested. And I think what we've got here is something that's really powerful. when used by when someone believes in it and actually invests themselves in it. And I would love to see this just roll out. As I said, in my mind, I think of it sort of like ripples. And so each stone creates its own ripple, and that ripple ripples out, and they can then, teach the people below them. And I think the worst thing that can happen to us is that we wake up at 80 and realize we've got a couple of weeks left in our lives, or we get, some bad news from the doctor, and we look back on our lives and feel that we didn't lead the life we know we could have. I think that's really sad. And for me, if I can be part of helping people to drive their own car in terms of their life and to decide where they're going and what they're doing, and to give them the tools that really help them through that process, I think that would be amazing. In terms of family, my family is super important to me. I'm very lucky to just have the coolest kids and a really great wife. My extended family as well. It's difficult living in a different country, but my sister's moved here and my niece is here now. I've got a lot of family in and around Sydney, so it's nice to get to spend some time with them. That for me is that sort of I think that's the dessert of life. So that's the good stuff, right? Like all the other stuff that you do leads to that. And then certainly I think I would like to be thought of as someone who left the world a better place than it was, right? So however that impact might be, and some days it's easier to make an impact than others, but yeah, that would probably be what I would like to be able to do. I think if I could look back on that, I would feel pretty comfortable.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on the show. What's the best way for people to find you, connect with you, follow you?
LinkedIn is probably the one that I'm on the most. I don't spend terribly much time on the other ones.
Yeah.
But just Simon Hareb, it's Hareb. Pop me a message, pop me a DM. I'm pretty active. I try to get on it almost every day. Otherwise, the website does have a link to book time if someone wanted to do that. Yeah. So if you just go onto theintentionalleaders.com, they can then book in from that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been great hanging out with you. Thank you.